They would create a community-based center where people diagnosed with schizophrenia could go. It was going to be non-drug oriented because he didn't believe that psychiatric drugs were the answer to schizophrenia.
It provided a place to where there could be people there who would be supportive and be there during the time they have a crisis. Instead of medicating them, be there with them and help them through it.
And the results were staggering. Soteria residents did significantly better than their peers who were on drugs, with far fewer readmissions. The success of Soteria House proved that understanding and compassion could relieve mental turmoil far better than psychiatric treatment, and without the nasty side effects. But despite this, Dr. Mosher's breakthrough would soon be utterly rejected by a psychiatric community dependent on psychotropic drugs and pharmaceutical money. In Dr. Mosher's 1998 resignation letter to the American Psychiatric Association, he wrote, "Psychiatry has been almost completely bought out by the drug companies. We condone and promote the widespread use and misuse of toxic chemicals that we know have serious long-term effects. Is psychiatry a hoax as practiced today? Unfortunately, the answer is mostly yes."
When people ask me about why aren't there more places to get this type of treatment and why is biopsychiatry kind of taken over, if they were effective, why did they go away? And I really think that it goes back to the question of money.
Between political pressure exerted by the psychiatric establishment and a lack of funding, refuges like Soteria are few and far between. But they can be found, and the truly troubled can and do recover. But what about common, everyday mental or emotional distresses, such as depression or mood swings? Without using psychiatry, how can we treat those? It's easier than one might think, since there is ample evidence that well over half of all psychiatric problems are actually caused by an underlying, undetected physical condition.
I would say nearly 100% of the time when someone comes in wishing to get off of an antidepressant, I find some underlying issues that weren't addressed originally that may have contributed or else caused their mood disorder.
And you start to look at all the different factors in their life. A lot of times you can find that there's multiple different reasons that someone's not feeling well.
Viruses can cause depression. Digestive issues can cause depression and anxiety.
Iron deficiency is very connected to depression.
One of the effects of pesticide poisoning is depression.
Little children, if they get a streptococcal infection, can become obsessive and compulsive.
I've seen people with bipolar disorder, manic depression, who have food allergies.
Pretty much any kind of psychiatric problem can be associated with a low thyroid state.
A ton of difficulties that a person has that can manifest itself as a supposed mental illness, but you fix the hormone, you fix the gland, you fix the nutrition. Miraculously, you can also fix the quote-unquote mental illness.
Why a psychiatrist cannot get to the root of a person's problem, that's the million-dollar question. I have absolutely no idea. They could. They learn it in school. They could just as easily run a blood test as I could run a blood test. They could run all the diagnostic tests I can. They study anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology. They just choose on their own to treat symptoms.
What about others whose psychological problem is not due to an underlying physical problem?
Divorcing parents, a change in babysitters, moving in the middle of a school year. Those can cause disruptions in the normal flow of sitting in a class and paying attention.
Good things are seen as stressful as bad things. Buying a house can be as stressful as losing a house. Getting married can be as stressful as getting divorced. But it may be some situational anxiety, situational depression that would have resolved on its own years ago. And the patient's been on medicine for years.
Well, it is ridiculous to think that normal depression or grief from normal life circumstances should be treated with medication. We didn't think this way before we had them because people just took it for granted that life was difficult at times. It was stressful, painful, and, difficult emotions, be they anger, pain, sadness, grief. All these things are normal reactions, and to cover that up with medication is really to turn your back on what makes us human beings, which is our emotions.
Of course, serious mental problems do at times require the assistance of others. But because of the massive money power of pharmaceutical companies that keeps paid psychiatrists propped up in positions of influence over the public, the media, and the rest of the medical field, the only treatment you will ever hear of is psychotropic drugs. But there is one thing the consumer can do: insist on full and accurate informed consent.
Informed consent boils down to the patient must be told about their diagnosis and what the risks and benefits and alternatives are to the treatment. Risks and benefits and alternatives to the treatment, risks, benefits, and alternatives to not treatment.
So what are the key points of informed consent when it comes to psychotropic drugs? 1. Psychiatric disorders are not actual diseases requiring medical treatment. 2. There is no scientific proof that psychiatric drugs resolve or cure any mental problems. 3. Psychiatric drugs mask symptoms and come with severe short and long-term side effects. 4. Psychiatric drugs can cause dependency and addiction. 5. Most mental problems are caused by an underlying physical illness. 6. No matter how severe the emotional or psychological distress, there are many effective options that do not involve psychiatric drugs. Unfortunately, these points are rarely told to patients.
I have over 2,000 clients, and I can honestly say 100% of them that have come to me, it has either been suggested that they take psychiatric drugs or they actually have taken them. And probably 70 to 80% have actually fallen into the trap and taken the psychiatric drugs because they didn't know what else to do.
50% of patients who are not treated for depression come out of it on their own without any therapy. Okay, that's never on an informed consent, but it is a fact. So, there's never a full informed consent.
But the truth is coming out. 14 U.S. state laws now severely restrict the psychiatric labeling and drugging of children. And a 2004 federal law prohibits school personnel from forcing parents to medicate their sons or daughters with psychotropics. Meanwhile, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has slapped their black box warning label on antidepressants for suicide in children and teenagers, and another warning on stimulants for heart attack, stroke, and sudden death in people of all ages. On another front, psychiatric survivors are now successfully pursuing legal remedies for the crippling effects of psychotropic drugs. Since 2005, there have been 50,000 individual product liability and personal injury lawsuits filed against drug companies for damage caused by psychotropic drugs, an average of 34 suits a day. Eli Lilly, accused of illegally marketing its antipsychotic Zyprexa, has paid out more than $2.5 billion in settlements to 34 states and 31,000 plaintiffs. In 2009, drug maker Pfizer agreed to forfeit over $2.3 billion, in part for colluding with a psychiatric front group to illegally market its antipsychotic, Geodon. Yet with yearly pharmaceutical revenues around $600 billion, drug companies treat judgments and penalties as just a cost of doing business. In fact, billions have been set aside in advance for just that purpose.
The pharmaceutical industry has such a huge financial base that even hundreds of millions of dollars in fines is basically meaningless to them.
Fines for some of these transgressions are like petty cash to the big companies. They're more concerned about the reputation that might be damaged by this. The main thing they do there is just try to hide the fact, and the quickest way to hide the fact is to quickly pay the fine and get out of town.
And this opens the door to enterprising attorneys, but they have to be prepared.
Lawyers need to understand that they do not receive adequate scientific training to conduct these cases by themselves. They need to gather together a team of experts who will help them to do these cases wisely and well. And then other people will begin to see the rates of success that we have had over the last 12 years doing what I call science-intensive litigation.
You have to go to the experts in the field, and say, okay, bring your expertise to bear, come to court, and tell people what you know.
I have found that there's an overwhelming number of people that when they see the atrocities that have occurred with psychiatry and the way people have been treated, they are very willing to come over and testify against psychiatry and testify against techniques that are being used.
The court system is just one area where people are speaking out. You too can help by sharing this documentary with coworkers, clients, patients, friends, and loved ones. In doing so, you will answer our final question. What can I do to protect our world from the scourge of psychiatry and psychotropic drugs? Get the facts at cchr.org.